Let's look at how you can define a failure strategy on a pipeline stage and on pipeline stage steps. So here I have a stage, I'm going to add a new deploy stage. I'm just going to call it failure. I'm going to select a service, and then in infrastructure, I'm going to select an environment, and then just pick an infrastructure real quick here. We won't really be using this because we won't be deploying anything. Once that's done, we can add our steps. But let's go back to the stage. At the stage level, you can specify your failure strategy in the advanced settings. And by default, we simply have rollback stage. The important thing to remember is that failure strategies apply to all the steps within the stage unless those steps have their own failure strategy configured. In that case, the steps failure strategy overrides whatever strategy you set here. So you can change the default by changing it to one of the other actions. I'm going to change it to manual intervention. And I'm going to set a timeout. And then a final, I'm just going to say abort if it exceeds that timeout. And that's going to apply to all the steps in the stage. Now if we add a step in a stage, in this case I'll add a shell script step. I'll just call it failure and put an exit code of 1 in there. Okay, and then over in advanced here, we have failure strategy. And by default, there is none. It inherits the strategy of the stage, but we can override that by specifying one. And we can select what type of error we want to fail on. Or sorry, if this error occurs, what apply our failure strategy. I'm just going to say any other here, and I'm going to pick manual intervention as well. But you can pick retry and then specify a count and intervals for the retry. You can also specify ignore or roll back the stage at any step. And pick manual, set a timeout again, and then abort at the end there. Alright, let's save it and run it. Alright, well that's running. There's a few other things to consider. You can have multiple failure strategies in your pipeline, in your stage, as a matter of fact. You can add multiple at the stage level and at the step level. If you do have those, it's important to remember that whatever error conditions you select for those different strategies, if they don't overlap, then they work as you would expect. But if there is overlap, those errors can occur at the same time. So if you had two that failed on authentication error, the first one would be applied. That one would, whatever strategy you set for that one would be applied. If you have conflicts at the same level, it gets evaluated the same way. For example, let's say you had two strategies on a step. You had abort on verification failure or authentication failure, and you had ignore on verification failure or connectivity error. So what will happen if you have verification failure, the step would be aborted. If you had an authentication failure, the step would be aborted. If you had a connectivity error, it would be ignored because the first one was already applied for verification failure and authentication failure. And so that's how it happens. Sometimes you can even have conflicts between the selected error types on different levels. And in that case, the step level always wins. Okay, so here's our failure. And the step overrides the stage. So it would have been the same either way because I selected manual intervention. So I'm just going to skip this. I'm just going to ignore the failure and let it go. And it did run my exit code 1, but that was the last step anyways. It does it marks it as a failure, but it continues to run. And that's really all there is. There are a lot of different errors that you can set and strategies you can set for different types of errors. You can see the pipeline is still marked as a success even though this step failed because we said to ignore it. And that's all.